A lifetime of hard work, children laughing in the kitchen, family photos on a restaurant wall, a legacy that lives on. It all comes from the power of a conversation, like the one Tommy Hall had with First Horizon Bank about taking over his father's Charleston-based restaurant business. Now the table is set for a whole new generation. First Horizon Bank. Let's find a way. Go to firsthorizon.com/Tommy. First Horizon Bank, member FDIC.
They say marketing is a madman's game. So now we turn it over to the Marketing Madmen with Nick Constantino and Trip Job.
Hello and welcome to the Marketing Madmen. Nick Constantino here with Trip Job, and today we're going to continue our series on agencies. I think today is a different kind of agency, but a lot of the principles are the same, and we might as well cover all our bases, right, Trip? We talk enough smack against agencies, so giving them a chance to defend themselves and tell us what they really do and make us look silly is an opportunity I love to take on. So what do we got in store for today, Trip?
Oh, absolutely, Nick, and I think we're a little more in my sweet spot in strategy and B2B. So we're fortunate. I've got a good friend, I think Maura Vetter, who is the founder and CEO of Modo Modo Agency. I think we've known each other for about 10 years.
Yep.
And it's great to have you here.
Thank you so much.
And also with you, we have Nicole Wedekin, who officially is Director of Strategy, but I love the title you gave me, Chief Smart Lady.
Yes.
Yes. So welcome, Nicole.
Thanks. Excited to be here.
Yeah, no. So this is our third in the series, as you know. We had a couple other great agencies that were a little more consumer focused. And while we'll get into the B2B side of things, you know, I think one of the things I've known more, and we've been on some boards together, and, you know, I think where you go back is you run a business yourself. Mm-hmm. And why don't you talk a little bit about Modo Modo, but also how you bring, you know, the thoughts of business from your own perspective to your clients.
Yep. Well, you know, thank you very much for having us on. And Nicole and I finish each other's sentences for a living, so I'm hoping the same will happen here. But, you know, as a business owner, you know, I started my early career wearing all the hats. And I think when you are able to be a salesperson and a finance person and a customer service person, you have a much deeper understanding of marketing, you know, of brand, of real brand promise, right, as opposed to just the marketing of a brand. And so I feel that's something that, you know, that is important to us at the agency, and I think it's a differentiator for us that we always go back to what is the business about, and, you know, how do you matter in the world, and then how do we take that into the brand and the marketing? And so, you know, that as a business owner, you know, I'm steeped in that, and you know, we really work with our clients to bring that same kind of comprehensive view of business and brand.
It changes the KPIs, right? If you've been in sales and you've been in finance, and your concept of a KPI is a lot different than if you've just been the guy in the marketing guy or the girl in the marketing side of it. We say it all the time, you know. I believe it is much easier to train a salesperson to market than a marketer to sell. Selling is a very innate thing in you, so very on brand for what we talk about. But that's incredibly important to hear that it started that way, because I have to imagine that your clients' results are what matter, and you have that gut feeling of what those results really are, even if they're telling you the wrong thing.
Exactly. Well, even this morning I was looking on LinkedIn, and you know, the CMO of Piedmont is celebrating his 3-year anniversary. And he has 20 stats that are about the business, about retention, about, you know, expanse, about impact in the community. And then at the very bottom he says, and our brand's doing pretty well, you know, in brand studies. And I do want to interrupt to say, since I brought up the 3-year anniversary, that Nicole is celebrating her 7-year anniversary at Modo Modo today.
Congrats.
Hey, fantastic.
We would have had champagne had we known.
Yeah, well, it's not only
back at the office.
And not only is it your 7th year anniversary, but you recently had a little celebration for Modo Modo, and we didn't really get into that. Why don't you tell us a little bit about the business? And you had a birthday just a couple months ago, I think.
So Modo Modo is a full-service B2B agency. We're here in Atlanta, but we really support clientele all over, global brands, Fortune 500. But we had our 15-year anniversary, which I always liken agency to dog years. So I don't know what 7 times 15 is.
Especially
can't do
with
that.
the same name.
Yeah,
Usually it's a name change or a complete rebrand or a founder or partner leaving.
Yep. So.
Wow. And I think you've been very involved in the Atlanta community, as you said, and in the Southeast for a long time. So what, Nicole, it's 7 years in, what strikes you? What makes Modo Modo special or different?
I mean, aside from, Moira already talked about the great work we do to help our clients solve business problems, not just marketing problems, right? For me, at this point, that feels like table stakes in the adventure. I think for me, it's also the people, right? So, agency culture, I know you guys talk a lot about this, but Modo is filled with really smart, really great people who want to help their clients. And so for me, it's really rewarding to come to work every day. I never thought coming into the agency world that I would be here for 7 years, right? This is a really great milestone to be celebrating. But I also feel like when we talk about there's lifers in agency, I get it, right? I get why it's addictive to be solving these problems and to be helping our clients. So, yeah.
Things change so fast.
Oh, yeah.
In the B2B, in the marketing space, I mean, COVID threw everything for a loop. Then you had the Great Resignation, and then every word changes, and everyone's got to brand it and market it themselves. So I have to imagine that pace of change has sped pretty quickly. I mean, at its core, we are B2B. I'm selling advertising to other businesses, and the scope and speed of how the business has changed has been so expedited over the past 3 years, and I don't see that pace slowing down, at least for a year and a half, 2 years.
No, and when we were talking about it in prep for this, I feel like, I describe it as a sea change. It is a major fundamental shift. There have been a lot. B2B companies, by and large, are mature markets. So they're, it's like turning a battleship in a bathtub, right? Slow moving. But this has been unbelievable the last 3 years. People that were making these, glacial changes, right? Who were like, nope, got to flip the switch.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, and hopefully, because I think you're a believer in this, that's steeped in strategy.
Yes.
To some degree, and not just a whim.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think some of it, and maybe we'll dive in a little deeper, is the things that are driving quicker change in that strategy, whereas it used to take forever to start to look at markets differently.
Yep. Well, that's where I go back to this notion of comprehensive strategy, right? Because there are tactics and channels that change overnight, and budgets and desire to change can happen overnight. But the fundamentals of a business do not, right? They take time, right? Especially in B2B. So if you're going to have a different customer experience, you have to deliver a different customer experience. You have to have your people understand a different, experience. And so I think in order to be truly strategic, you have to have greater depth, greater substance, which is why I wanted Nicole to be here today, because, our strategic investment in our clients goes well beyond their marketing, right? We understand how do they make money? Where do they fit in their ecosystem? Where they are in the Gartner Quadrant or the Forrester Wave or the whatever. What does their CEO say on their investor calls? That's as important for us to understand than, as any marketing metric.
Yeah,
I think that's a great point. Yeah, and I think maybe ask Nicole the question is, for many of your clients, you've got deep relationships. Who are you working with? Is it just the CMO, or is Maura said, is it some other people in the C-suite? I mean, how does that change? And I think as business owners, how do you need to think about this?
Yeah, and the age-old answer in marketing is it depends. But in an ideal client relationship, to your point, Trip, we have relationships outside of marketing. So I think it's incredibly important that other functions like sales, like experience, revenue, whatever, are at the table for the conversations, because that's when you can really get traction, when you understand what is important to them and how can we create that connective tissue between what we're doing in marketing, brand, et cetera, to what they're doing. And so with our clients, right, it really does range across the board depending on, if they're mid-market, if they're Fortune 100, 500, you name it, or if we're working with domestic clients versus, overseas clients. But in general, right, we want to make sure that as many of those kind of stakeholders and players are brought to the table for the process, because that's when you get the rich insight, and that's when you really start to understand what makes them tick, makes their customers excited, et cetera.
Yeah.
You know, I will just say, too, I think this is an opportunity to have people think differently about agencies, the way we have engaged. Early on in Modo's history, we worked with a variety of private equity companies. That was coming off the 2008 crash, so there were a lot of acquisitions. And those private equity companies brought us in before deals, during deals. We sat in the room with the new placed management teams or the founders rolling off and PE, and we had a complete, insider's view of what was happening. And so we talk a lot about, there are benefits that agencies bring as outsiders because they can see your market. But if you bring them inside and you let them have access to that,
you get to see the good, bad, and the ugly. Especially if you're talking private equity, you got to see the good, bad, and the ugly, which makes informed decisions, and you are impartial, as opposed to somebody who built the company.
And we know where you want this brand and need this brand to be in 5 years, not just what this quarter's.
Yeah, usually if it's private equity, where you need the brand to be. There's no want there. You need it to be there at that time.
And the CMO, I think, needs to have that awareness. I was lucky early in my career at KC. My mentor as a president had been in my role years before. And his comment was, look, you own the agency relationship, but I can step in. Marjorie, as head of sales, can step. I want it to be a community. You own it. You have the last vote, but we're all in this together. And I don't know how often that happens. You see it, but I think that does set up a better, overall environment.
Yeah. Well, this is something that I think is really important in the last couple of years too. And we're recruiting madly right now, and so I look at a lot of stats on turnover, and in a lot of our clients, we are the greatest continuity they have. We've had clients for 12 years, 10 years.
Yeah, and that pace is just going to be sped up also.
Yeah.
That consistency of you guys will be sped up because people are going to be let go very quickly over the next couple of years, I
so
think.
as this turnover is happening, we get to reset those relationships. So, there are new people showing up, and as they show up to the table, of course the agency goes to those meetings. We can be more informed then. And so I think we also have had an opportunity, as the pages have been turned, to kind of reset how clients engage us.
Yeah, no, I think that's really important. So we've been talking a little bit about your history and how you think about strategy and all that. When we come back from the break, we want to get into maybe a little bit of what makes B2B different from B2C, and then we'll talk about some of the trends that are going on in the market today and where you see that going. So we have Maura Vetter and Nicole Wedekin with Modo Modo, and you are listening to the Marketing Madmen on Extra 106.3. We'll be right back.
Now back to the Marketing Madmen on Extra 106.3 FM.
Welcome back to the Marketing Madmen. Trip Job and Nick Constantino here with our guests from Modo Modo Agency. And we were talking a little bit about their focus on B2B and, the fact that this is the third in our series of agency discussions. And, Nick, what's your perspective so far compared to, our two B2C focused agencies?
Yeah, it's been refreshing to hear about the approach. One of the things that we talk about a lot is the nature of the C-suite has changed a little bit. CMOs, in my experience, have their power reduced a little bit. I think the generation that they came up in, the data revolution was new, so they didn't grow up with that data. And now you got these young kids flaring data around that are kicking those more creative CMO types out of those spaces. So I think that it's very smart to approach the salespeople and the finance people, because I think that C-suite, there's a lot more people on it. There's a CIO, a CTO. I've seen letters, I have to look it up. I'm like, I don't even know what that one is. A CJO, I don't even know what these things are. But it's refreshing to hear that. And ultimately, most of the times, not all the times, but a B2B client goes B2B to C because that business is selling to a consumer. So if you don't understand the consumer behavior, then it's hard to understand the business relationship. So the correlations between a B2C agency and a B2B agency are similar in that sense. Now, when you bring the B2B world, you're talking much larger deals where it's more important to have stronger relationships with individual large-scale people as opposed to scale and millions of customers. So that's where the relationship is that important. So that's where I think the strategy of knowing your CMO and your CFO comes into play really importantly here. I'm curious, as this evolves and people are being laid off and just all these things, and free money's gone. You talk about private equity. That free money is gone. So behaviors are going to change. You being that consistent, who are your competitors? Are you being RFP'd? Are people coming after you? Are there new startups in this space? Is the space of these B2B agencies shrinking? I'm curious more about the landscape of the business you serve, because I think that's an important differentiation that I'll really, because, in B2C, there's a new agency every day. There's an analytics agency, a digital agency, and our biggest frustration is personally, they don't even talk to each other. So how are you saying you're in the client's best interest if all you're trying to do is get as much money for yourself as possible? In an ideal world, digital talks to media, talks to analytics, talks to everybody, and they all get together, and it just so rarely happens. So what does your space look like? Where do you stand in that space, and what do you see the change in that space coming?
So I feel like we are a different breed of cat, for sure. We did we had a relationship with Gartner, and they acquired a company that's very invested in the marketing space because of MarTech and understanding all of those things. And so we did a vendor briefing on the agency space. And part of what makes the B2B landscape so different, and it's been decimated, right? There is no B2B agency landscape. Let's, we have a blue ocean or a green field or whatever analogy you want to use.
Are you sure you want to be telling people that?
Yeah. It's true. Oh, they can't, but we have
barriers to entry are high.
Barriers to entry are up here, yes. So come on, everybody. It'll take you 10 years to get to us. But, the thing there is B2B is the long game and the big game. And nothing happens overnight. And the amount of understanding you have to have, the awareness, all these things, the differences between sales and financial model and distribution channels and all the things, to be substantive and know what those things mean, and then to be able to pull that out of a client and to apply it to a brand is really hard to do. So there aren't a lot of really good B2B agencies or large agencies. Some of them recently disbanded. So, we really feel like, yes, we're getting RFP'd because I think a lot of people want to make sure to me, RFPs are people doing due diligence, right? And being able to tell somebody, I checked the boxes and I talked to more than one, right? So we get those, but pretty immediately, I'll give you an example. I won't out my source, but we had a conversation the other day. This is the first of 6 calls that I'm going to have. I'm going to identify 6 agencies. We're going to bring that down to 3, and then 3 are going to move forward. And so we had a 30-minute call with the contact, and at the end of the contact said, and that process I talked about, I already know you're one of the 3, and I haven't determined who the other 6 or 2 are, but I want to go ahead and set up the meeting with you and the CMO. So it is really, it's hard to find people that have the kind of experience that we have. And, I think also we're really invested in teaching that to our people. At some point, I know we want to talk about that, about this kind of the disconnect between the entry ramp to employment on the B2C side of the world and what education people get coming out of school versus what you need to be to come into a B2B agency. So,
No, and I think, when I look back at it, anytime we had a strategic agency, that first time might be a year, kind of review. But then we were typically on a 3-year, with the strategic agencies.
Yes.
And I would say in just about every case at my couple of stops, I can't think of once where we didn't have probably 2 runs. So it was more of a 6-year relationship. And at that point, sometimes, in one case, the agency, we took a break, for a couple of years and then came back. But it wasn't a negative. It just was, we probably needed new voices, both of us. But it is. I love what you said, the long game.
Yeah, it's absolutely the long game. And, the notion of, when you're talking about enterprise technology, right, which is something B2B often deals with, the switching cost is real, right? It's the time, it's the money, it's the people, it's the pain. It's the same with a B2B agency, right? We don't simply understand this quarter's thing and the brand standard to be applied to a billboard. It goes so much deeper. Right. And so, I think there's good and bad with that, right? There's a very high expectation. There's true partnership expected. And, you have to work through things just like you would in a marriage. Like you said, sometimes you have to take a break and then you come back refreshed.
It's an important part. One of the things we talked about a little bit with B2C is it also takes time to build real rapport. And especially with a business with high-level decisions, if they don't have that rapport with you and trust with you, then how are they going to empower you to make those decisions? And when you start with something, you're starting from scratch. You're starting a relationship from scratch. I mean, I know with our clients, once you make it past 2 or 3 years, they'll never leave because the trust is built, the rapport is there. You know, we probably got out and had beers together, and I've heard the real numbers and where the real margins are. And it's very hard for someone to leave once that trust is built. You know, I joke about it, but, you know, digital agencies, if you get into Google Analytics, how can you fail? You know everything about a business. Once you, it's surprising you're not let in on that more. So I think that's a really key point, that trust, and it's even harder on the B2B space for sure. I think, you know, as this is really new to a lot of people, I believe, talk a little bit about, you know, what you do for clients, what services you offer, and then we'll put you a little bit on the spot here. What are you best at? What is your calling card? I see Nicole smirking over there, so maybe we go over to her. But just I think it's important to know, right? Like you talk enterprise software. That's not the first thing that comes to mind, but my goodness gracious, if you don't have your CRM system set up and how you're doing predictive analytics, if you don't have a good basis. So talk a little bit about the services you offer and how that's different than the B2C space, and then gloat a little bit, if you will, about your core competencies and what you're best at.
Do you want to take this?
Sure. You know, I think there's obviously the core bread and butter of what you think of an agency, right? We do brand strategy, we do integrated marketing campaigns, we do all of the due diligence around that. But I think what makes us special goes back to what Moira was talking about at the beginning of the conversation, which is all of the places where the complexity comes into play. So whether that's creating that connective tissue with sales, rolling out things internally, right? Change management. You think about these organizations who are going through these periods of business transformation. There's so many dynamics at play, and so much of what we do isn't necessarily marketing, right? We're coming in there and we're helping them. We're being consultative. We're helping with communications. So there's so many things that don't fit squarely in a marketing box. But I think because we're able to do that and to connect it back to the marketing campaigns and all of the goals that we have there, I think that's really where what we have to offer is different.
Did you get pulled in by any clients in the last year, you know, the Great Resignation and all that, and working with HR as far as internal? You talked about recruitment a minute ago, but even internal, you know, how to retention. You know, we've had some people on talking about that, and we're curious. You know, some agencies may just say, no, that's not our space, but, you know, how have you approached that?
So we can go back to you in a minute, but you know, to me, there is one brand, right? Yes, there are layers to it, right? There's internal, there's external, but we had a tremendous amount of this. And again, I go back to the private equity example. When you're doing private equity, you want to know what's the business, where's it headed? Okay, does the new management team understand that? Have we gotten everybody on board? Great, now let's go to market like that. It's no different in one of these large organizations. If they're going through digital transformation or they have radically changed who they are in the world, they have to make sure that everybody understands and believes and breathes and is the brand. Now, you know, with I think an added ripple that the pandemic added was mental health issue, right? Strains on health and wellness and, you know, everything, diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, right? You know, all the things that make people feel connected in the world. And so to us, it's a natural progression, right? You don't it's not, oh, you'll have to talk to an internal comm or employer brand company. They are together. And so we have multiple clients right now that we really span the gamut from, you know, business strategy into the brand, internal and external, and then how you take that out to market or how you bring people into, how you bring the engagement in. So we do a ton of it.
Well, and I think with, you know, these really large enterprise organizations, you know, we can find ourselves in a place where the internal comms or the HR division is not necessarily connected to the brand team. And so part of the role that we can play is saying, you're telling this story and HR, you're telling this story. How do we connect those and build something that brings both to light? And so I think that's where, you know, in these organizations that are trying to pivot and move quickly, that's where I think having someone who can take a step back and say, you might be missing this golden opportunity to bring these two stories together. And it's not because you you haven't thought about it, it's because you probably don't have time, right?
Well,
and so
I was
having
gonna
someone
say,
to
I
help
love
with
that because you probably have the ability to make that phone call to your in both contacts, whereas they're running every day and they're on different floors, they're in different
1000%.
offices, whatever it happens.
And they have different
to be.
agendas.
Yeah,
right? They have
exactly.
completely different agendas. You talk about like a sales and a marketing department. That's what we deal with. The agenda is completely different. The marketing's agenda is to get as many people into the ecosystem. The sales agenda is to monetize it at all means possible.
Yeah.
A third party is the only one that can be impartial and point them in the right direction.
Yeah. So, we hit on that a little bit, but what other things? What are you seeing in the landscape that's changing now? How are you, trying to help your clients react to some of the, the post-pandemic or the current maybe economic volatility? How are you looking at things?
Well, one of the themes that comes up a lot with our clients, because these are businesses that are, these are leading businesses, right? They've been around for. We've got clients that have been around since the 1800s, right? They're not going anywhere, and the challenge for companies like that is evolving, right? And to connect to the new generation, right? And there is always a new generation, and what they expect is different. And so I think a lot of the things that we are looking at, the pandemic opened a lot of our clients' eyes to trying to tap into markets they were not speaking with, or the new relevant customers that they had not made a priority, but also the ways that you have to engage those customers. So I think that's a big part. And another theme with our clients is that when there is volatility, there are winners as well as losers, right? In the consumer marketplace, I think you immediately go, ooh, bad economy, bad for customers. How do we make people feel better now that things are bad? In a B2B reality, you actually have some businesses that rise when there is volatility.
And they rise because others fall also.
Right.
Correct.
And especially in some of these fields where you just know, and usually the ones who have the most established brands, who market it the best way, are the ones who make it through that duration, and they market more in the downturn because they know that their competitors are going to be weeded out, especially the ones that shouldn't have had brands to begin with, and we see it all the time.
Correct. And, I think the important thing there, a phrase that you'll hear us talk about a lot, is not being tone deaf, right? There is a way to be responsive and evolve and serve what people need when they need it, without being opportunistic, if situations are bad. And I will also say, I think there's been a bit of a whip where that is concerned over the last year, because we went from 9 months ago to we will never find enough talent, and we have 8 million open jobs within a 9-month window, just as a lot of these recruitment campaigns are launching. Oops, just kidding. We just laid off, 10,000 people. It's
and that's consumer goods too. Like travel has that same whip, because all of a sudden, all that pent up demand, everyone's traveling, and then they're going to look at their bank accounts. They can't make car payments, but they have flights to Italy planned. So I think that most markets are going to see that whiplash for a considerable amount of time. And I'm curious, that change you're talking about. What do you tell people who built that strategy? How do you kind of stop them from going over the edge about, you built this strategy, it's based on long term, but the market is just swinging like crazy? What advice do you give them? What are you telling them right now when they feel like they're forced, they have to make a change? What is the advice that you guys give them in this current state?
I'm going to get this one thing out, and then you do. I think that the ability to be flexible and to think of marketing plans as systems, right? When I go back, let's say 10 years, right? And I've been doing marketing for 30 years. When you go back 10 years, everybody planned for the year and planned for the quarter and produced all the work and then launched all the work, right? And so if you needed to be agile, right, you were not...
And put it in the big binder on the shelf for everyone,
right,
the jokes we make.
So you couldn't change quickly enough. And then you had the complete flip of that. You went to the pandemic where people were living day to day, and you could not think long term. And so you've got to have this happy medium of, we have to be able to change. We have to have enough real-time insight to change. Change or lack of performance is not a bad thing. It means you're reading the tea leaves and you're understanding, but we have to be able to change. And so some of that is just, again, changing how people think about their marketing, how they budget for it, how they communicate with each other about how long something will live.
One of the things I wonder, I know you guys have mentioned in the past, you're doing a lot in the technology space, and you're probably investing in your own technology. How does that tie into it, to be that flexibility? What are you looking at, or with your client? Is that a key part of where you choose to invest and how to help them be flexible in looking at those systems and ever-changing plans?
I think we have to always be tech savvy, but we're not value added resellers. We're not schlepping systems. We're not, which is important, right?
Yeah.
We're technology agnostic, just like we're channel agnostic. To me, the thing that works is what works for the customer, what engages the customer. But there's no question that the speed of change with technology and all the systems that people use means that you have to keep, investing in your own talents to connect. And I definitely think on the MarTech side of the house, that's one that we're more strongly invested. Our media department, as we expand media and the connectivity between media and our strategy function, I think it's not so much use of technology to deploy the technology, but use of technology to derive insight.
Yeah, that's absolutely. Yeah. I know personally, I get contacted for some sort of marketing tech, whether it be lead generation. I mean, I'm talking like 50, 100 a week, and like I know they're spending money on it. I mean, it's just a shame that and LinkedIn is the main resource, but it's a shame to see it because the problem I found with the internet, everyone's got their hands out for a cut. So by the time you buy a service, there's 3 different vendors, it's a tech executor. Everybody's got their hand out, which means you're paying fees for other people to take on all this stuff. So I think being agnostic is really important. What about risk management? So we're going into a slow time now, and some of the things are risk, right? Is how much are you willing to spend to generate your results? As you guys go through this stuff, are you making those sort of recommendations? Are you watching, is now the time to be more risky, less risky? What are you seeing? Are people handling risk differently? Because I have to imagine in that B2B space, that's something that's talked about frequently.
It is, but I feel like in B2B, it is a long game. I mean, sales, we have clients, and I'm not kidding, we have a client that has 15-year sales cycles.
Well,
That
gets rid of risk. That's like a stock market. In 15 years, the money's going to go up. It's easy. 7
years. We've got a client right now that we are talking about thought leadership, and they've already sold all their capacity, and they're starting on 2025 sales. Right. So this is not this is the extreme between B2C and B2B, where risk is a very different thing. The risk is not being relevant in 3 years. It is not that we overspent this quarter's budget or that we used the wrong channel. And so it's just a totally different
that makes
reality.
sense. I'm glad I asked the question because it puts that context over B2C.
So, this will be the one sports analogy I use when you're talking about that is I always remember.
I don't believe it. You're going to have another sports analogy.
Yeah, probably. But the old Wayne Gretzky, it's not, when you talked about transforming, it's not about, passing the puck to where they are today. It's I want to pass the puck where they're going to be ahead. And when you talked about, getting people to look at their strategy different and maybe their tactics and channels, because we need to be where the next generation or the new generation is. I mean, Nicole, I don't know if you want to talk about that, but how do you think about that and making sure you get your clients aligned with where they need to be going, not where they are right this minute?
Mm-hmm. I think what's really important for that is going back to changing the conversation away from the tactics. Not that the conversation around the tactics isn't important. I'm not saying that. It's we have to understand what that North Star vision is first. And so, Moira was talking about earlier the call where, there was the RFP and we're talking to 6 different agencies, and the conversation started with, we need a campaign that is specific to these 2 tactics. But where we got to with the conversation is, well, what are you trying to do and where are you struggling in the market? And it became tactic agnostic. Once we understood that, right, then we can come back around and say, I know you're talking about these 2 tactics, or I know these are important to you, and historically these have been the things that you've put a lot of investment in, but we think there's opportunity in this new channel or in this new tactic that we would like to test, right? And that's where having the right technology and the right infrastructure to say, do we see this moving the needle comes to play. So we try not to start the conversation around tactics. And there's a lot, I think, with B2B, there's a lot of push when something happens in consumer to say, how does that apply to B2B? But I think for us, right, we want to be more conservative in making sure that it's going to be the right recommendation. And that's for, you talk about risk. There's a lot of risk in being the first mover on a channel. And most of our clients, if you're, 150 years old, that's not the brand you want to be.
Yeah, and the sales cycle's so long, right? If you capitalize on the risk and you hit it, it's an immediate instant gratification. But if you're talking even a 5-year sales cycle, that immediate instant gratification is not as important to it all. So that makes a ton of sense.
My pet peeve was, and I had a few presidents, CEOs who would go, my spouse
My daughter
is really big into this. And so, I mean, it went both sides. I'm not saying male, female, spouse. Yes. But I got it both ways. I'm just like, okay. I don't think your spouse is one of our clients.
Yep. No, that's the easiest, honestly, that often not only the spouse isn't, you're not, right? I mean, that's the challenge we have. In B2B, you often get this committee where you have an economic buyer, you have a technical buyer, you have a financial buyer, all these different kind of committee. And if it's like one of our clients is wound care solutions, right, in healthcare. You can have a marketer. I'm pretty sure the marketer is not a clinical wound care specialist, and you may not like something, but you are not your audience.
No, I think that's a great point, and we'll dive into that a little bit more when we come back from the break, and also get a few more of Modo Modo's opinions around marketing. And you were listening to the Marketing Madmen on Extra 106.3. We'll be right back.
Now back to the Marketing Madmen on Extra 106.3 FM.
Welcome back to the Marketing Madmen. Trip Job and Nick Constantino here with our special guest from Modo Modo Agency, Maura Vetter and Nicole Wedekin. And we've covered a lot of ground, and I think what you've been talking about, from the whole business perspective, thinking about where the future is going with your clients. I'm going to ask you the question. What would be, the reason someone, or maybe the size of company, or just the environment they're going through, what would be a B2B company that really should be thinking about getting help from an agency, a strategic?
Marketing is, the investment is typically smaller than on a consumer side. So from a spend standpoint, I do think you need to be a larger small business or a mid-sized business typically to be really setting aside money. So, typically our clientele would be 30 million, 100 million, right? So you're really starting to get into that. You're an Inc. 5000 company, right? So scale is situational.
Well, PE-owned.
Right?
So you talked about
yes,
PE.
PE-owned.
If it's the size company PE starting to invest in.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
But I love the word scale there.
Yep.
Because there's some businesses that have no intention to
No,
scale.
if you
They are
have no
completely
intent-
content with their $20 million.
Correct.
They never plan to be bigger.
Yep.
And there are some that it works so well here. Let's move to Chattanooga. Let's move to these adjacent markets. So that makes a ton of sense.
So there's a lot of B2B organizations that are so sales-centric that may be working, that aren't planning to scale. Maybe they're relational, and maybe they won't be forever, but they don't necessarily need an agency. But if you are trying to scale your business, to tap new markets, to become more sophisticated at how you use all these different marketing techniques, that's where an agency is amazing, because a B2B company cannot afford, like we have about 40 team members at Modo. And, we do have developers and copywriters and designers, but we have marketing strategists, brand strategists, media people that understand, all these different things. And it is not, you cannot afford as a $20 million, $30 billion company to have a team of 40 on staff that have all those disciplines that are changing. And so that's the benefit of, waking up one day and going, we are not only a going concern, we are a scaling concern. This is serious, and we need the professionals.
But directly tied to revenue growth also, right? When you talk about
Correct.
scaling,
Yes.
you're tying yourself to something that will grow the overall revenue base of the company,
Correct.
which makes you almost a revenue creator every time.
Absolutely. And the recurring revenue, right? You see this a lot where, I mentioned the sales model, right? If I know, if Bob has had this account for 15 years and Bob knows they're always going to buy from him, he probably doesn't need a lot of marketing help. But if Bob only sells to automotive and they have to get into hospitality, you need marketing to build a brand, to generate awareness, to get in over there.
Yeah. For how about fee structure? Again, since we're talking to people who potentially are customers, how does fee structure work? Typical agency, they take 15%, they're on a retainer. All different models.
All of ours is fee-based and project-based. We're not taking percentages of anything because in some cases there is no media spend, right? In a lot of these cases, right? If you've got an audience of 1,000 buyers, you're not buying billboards and TV, so it wouldn't be a percentage of something. So we really built our business around paying for the thinking that, and sometimes it ends up in campaigns, sometimes it ends up in programs and processes that help the internal teams do things differently and better. I mean, you had made a comment a minute ago about coaches. I think there's also a part of our role as consultant and coach to, all of our client contacts about how to effectively manage communications, how to think about what they're doing, how to share within an organization, all of those things.
Well, to that point, I'm curious because we talked about CMO tenure, and I've seen it. I know you've seen it, where someone comes in new as a CMO to an organization, maybe hasn't been in that industry, maybe is only a specialist.
Yep.
I got to believe, all the things you talk about, the business, the strategy, you can be, in a way, that coach to that new CMO in some organizations.
Yeah, and I think, though, you have to have a respect for what has come before, and you also have to have respect for where things are going and what the new people are intended or have been tapped to bring to the table. And I think that's something that we always do with our clients. We have, and I think this is important in B2B too, we do not throw out the old. We do not throw out the people who have been there because that wisdom is necessary to help inform the thing. But we have clients that are probably on their 5th or 6th CMO since we've been there.
Wow, that's it's crazy to think about because the tenure you would think for a CMO is so long that 5th or 6th. I mean, you've seen it all.
Year and a half.
You're such a resource to anyone above that.
How do you deal with that, Nicole?
Well, I was going to add to what she was saying. Some of what we're doing is also educating why you shouldn't throw something out, right? I think the tendency when someone new comes in is clear the desk, let's look at this with fresh lens, which I think is great. But a lot of times there's a lot of intentionality in building to that place, right? And so let's see what we can keep, and then let's see what we need to pivot to align with kind of whatever the new direction or new vision that they're bringing to the table. And so, again, Moira talked about earlier in the conversation, sometimes we've been there so long, we have the historical of why, and they might be looking at something without the context behind what was the strategy. And so some of the times we're coming in and we're saying, let us walk you through the journey of how we got here and how the strategy has pivoted. And it doesn't necessarily mean that's where it needs to continue to be, but we want to make sure that you understand all of the different inflection points along the way that got us to this place so that we can say, okay, how do we redirect moving forward together?
How often do they listen? Because I'm wondering if there are any I told you so moments that either of you have in your heads where you told them some sound advice and they just chose to look past it. We don't have to go into that segment. I see the smirk on your face. That will do. That will do. That will do. I'm just curious.
I would say culturally, we're not I told you so people.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That's how you get a long-term relationship.
Yeah.
Right? It's like, understand you have to test that thinking, and now let's look at where we are. And so I think that's important too. You talk a lot about agencies and what they're like, and culturally, we are a different kind of agency, right? We believe we earned our seat at the table, and we are not transient, creative, foo-foo people that are just here. We really have substance to bring, and I think that mutual respect is what, again, really deepens the relationships we have with our clients.
No question. We're getting close to the end of time, but anything in the future, anything that's crystal ball?
We are in a more reactive reality. I would say since the pandemic, people kind of got back into that. We're living quarter to quarter, which means that the response time has just, it's just accelerated so much. And often the agency is kind of the whip end of that, right? It's like we've talked about it for 6 months, and now the agency has 1 week to activate something. And generationally, the people in B2B who have done this for 20 and 30 years may have come up in a time when agencies worked 70 hours a week, 80 hours a week. There was always somebody at the shop at 1 o'clock in the morning. And the recent discussions that I've had with clients is really to help them understand.
Fat little babies.
Agency is different, right? It is not simply the health and well-being and the balance and the belonging that we want for employees in other organizations, but not in the agency. We need agency people to have that balance too. And so we are not going to work around the clock. And so, it means that we all need to plan better and we need to partner better so that we can be there for you, but our people are whole as well.
And I think what you've said today is that you really think it through, so it is not a crash course at the end. And I think
Correct.
that's, we've been fortunate to have Maura Vetter and Nicole Winnikin from Modo Modo Agency. I think it's modomodoagency.com if you want to find them out there. So fantastic discussion today. Thank you so much for being here. And for Nick Constantino and myself, this has been the Marketing Madmen on Extra 106.3.
Tonight in Arkansas, there's a mother tucking in her daughter and turning off the light. A business owner is burning the midnight oil. An at-home dinner date is plating up possibility. And it's all happening under one roof. How? The power of a conversation, like the one John from Integrity Solutions had with First Horizon Bank about his vision for a sustainable mixed-use building. Now it's not just words, it's life. First Horizon Bank. Let's find a way. Go to firsthorizon.com/John. First Horizon Bank, member FDIC.